The hum of conversation filled the Crossroads Truck Stop as dusk painted the sky in hues of amber and gold. Truckers sipped coffee while the neon open sign flickered to life. Marcus Davidson, a Marine veteran with decades of service, sat at the counter with his back to the wall, meticulously studying a map. His third cup of coffee steamed beside him, a testament to his precise routine. The tranquil scene shattered as two motorcycles roared into the lot, their exhausts deliberately loud. The bikers entered, their leather vests displaying the snarling wolf insignia of the Road Wolves MC. Conversations faltered, forks paused midair, and unease settled over the room. Jenny, the cheerful waitress, froze mid-step, her hand trembling as she placed the coffee pot back on the burner. "Evening," the taller biker drawled, his gravelly voice slicing through the silence. A patch on his vest read Hammer. His companion, wiry and snake-like with a coiled serpent tattoo on his neck, sneered as he surveyed the room. "Nice setup," Hammer continued, his tone laced with menace. Beth Morrison, the diner's owner, emerged from the kitchen. Her expression was calm, but Marcus noticed her hand drift beneath the counter toward the baseball bat she kept for emergencies. "Welcome to Crossroads," Beth said evenly. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" Hammer smirked. "How about everything in the register?" Snake wandered toward a family's table, deliberately brushing the little girl's chair, making her cry out softly. Marcus looked up, his voice calm but firm. "The lady said no." Hammer turned slowly, locking eyes with Marcus. "Who do you think you are?" Marcus sipped his coffee. "Just a guy who's seen your kind before. And trust me, you're picking the wrong fight." Have you ever witnessed someone stand their ground against impossible odds? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of courage, resilience, and unexpected heroes like this one. The tense silence in the diner seemed to stretch as Hammer stared down Marcus, his towering frame casting a long shadow over the counter. Snake, now emboldened by his partner's posture, circled the room like a predator, his eyes scanning for signs of weakness. "You must not know who you're messing with, old man," Hammer snarled, his lips curling into a sneer. Marcus didn't flinch. His eyes, steady as steel, locked on Hammer's. "No, but I know enough. You're road wolves fresh up from Texas, trying to bully your way into new territory. Let me save you the trouble. This stop isn't for sale." The few patrons in the diner watched with bated breath. The father at the family table instinctively pulled his daughter closer, shielding her from the growing tension. Jenny whispered nervously to Beth, "Should we call someone?" Beth hesitated, but didn't move. Her instincts told her Marcus was more than capable of handling himself. Hammer leaned closer to Marcus, his breath hot with aggression. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But guts don't keep bones from breaking." Marcus sipped his coffee, his calm demeanor only stoking Hammer's frustration. "You're making a scene and you're scaring the kid," he said, nodding toward the family. "How about you take your intimidation act somewhere else?" Snake stepped in, his voice a low hiss. "You don't get it, do you? This stretch of highway is ours now. That means everything in it belongs to us. Diners, stops, even the truckers." "You're mistaken," Marcus replied coldly, setting his mug down with deliberate care. "This place belongs to the people who built it and keep it running. And if you think you're taking it, you're in for a rude awakening." Hammer's hand twitched near his vest, likely reaching for a weapon. Marcus caught the movement, but didn't react outwardly. Instead, he straightened, the quiet authority of a seasoned warrior emanating from him. "Careful," Marcus said, his voice dropping into a warning tone. "You pull something here, and you'll regret it." The tension was shattered by the sound of the diner door swinging open. Sheriff Tom Cooper stepped in, his badge gleaming in the low light. His sharp gaze took in the scene instantly, from Marcus's poised calm to the biker's barely contained aggression. "Evening, gentlemen," Cooper said, his voice steady but firm. "Is there a problem here?" Snake scowled, retreating slightly, but Hammer didn't budge. "No problem, Sheriff," Hammer said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Just introducing ourselves to the locals." "Consider yourselves introduced," Cooper replied, stepping closer. "Now move along before you overstay your welcome." Hammer glared at Marcus one last time, his jaw tight with suppressed anger. "This ain't over," he growled, turning toward the door. Marcus watched them leave, their boots heavy against the linoleum floor. Snake paused at the threshold, locking eyes with the family's father. The young girl whimpered, and her mother tightened her grip on her shoulder. "Sweet kid," Snake muttered with a cruel smile before stepping outside. The roar of their motorcycles echoed across the lot as the road wolves rode off into the night. Inside, the tension in the diner slowly dissipated, replaced by a collective exhale. The father approached Marcus hesitantly. "Thank you," he said, his voice trembling. I don't know what would have happened if." Marcus raised a hand to cut him off. "Nothing was going to happen," he said simply. Then, turning to Beth, he added, "You might want to call the sheriff's office. They'll be back." Beth nodded, her hands still trembling as she reached for the phone. Jenny poured Marcus another cup of coffee, her own hands unsteady. "What are we going to do, Marcus?" she asked quietly. Marcus glanced out the window, watching the taillights of the bikes fade into the distance. "We're going to show them that they picked the wrong place, the wrong people, and definitely the wrong veteran to mess with." True to Marcus's prediction, the road wolves weren't done. By the next evening, the sound of roaring engines heralded their return. This time, they came in force. 6 bikes pulled into the parking lot, their chrome gleaming in the twilight. Hammer and Snake led the pack, flanked by 4 new members, each one more menacing than the last. Inside, Marcus had already taken his seat at the counter, his posture relaxed but his senses on high alert. Beth worked behind the counter, her movements deliberate but tense. Jenny lingered near the kitchen, her eyes darting nervously toward the front windows. The bikers dismounted, their heavy boots crunching on the gravel. Hammer's voice carried as he barked orders to his crew. "Stay close. This place is ours by the end of the night." Snake smirked as he scanned the windows. "Think the old man will be here again?" "Hope so." Inside, Marcus caught Beth's eye and gave her a reassuring nod. "It's okay," he said softly. "Just keep doing what you're doing." The door chimed as the bikers entered, their presence sucking the air out of the room. Hammer's eyes locked on Marcus immediately, his sneer returning. "Back again, old man?" Hammer drawled. "Back again," Marcus replied evenly, not bothering to look up from his map. "Thought you might be." Hammer laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "You've got a death wish, don't you?" Marcus looked up, his gaze unwavering. "No, but you do if you keep this up." Snake leaned against the counter, his hand drifting toward his belt. "Big talk for someone outnumbered." "You think numbers scare me?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but edged with steel. Hammer slammed his fist on the counter, rattling the coffee cups. "You're playing a dangerous game, old man." Marcus stood, his full height revealed as he stepped closer to Hammer. His calm demeanor remained, but his presence seemed to grow, filling the room. "No," Marcus said, his voice like a blade. "You're the one playing games, and you're going to lose." The bikers hesitated, sensing the weight behind Marcus's words. Hammer's bravado faltered for a moment before he covered it with a smirk. "We'll see about that," he said, stepping back. "Let's go, boys. We've got other stops to make." As they filed out, Hammer pointed 2 fingers at his eyes and then at Marcus, the unspoken promise clear. When the roar of their bikes faded into the night, Marcus turned to Beth. "They'll bring more next time," he said, his tone grim but resolute. "We need to be ready." The air around Crossroads Truck Stop was electric with tension. By the following evening, word of the road wolves' antics had spread among the local truckers. Several regulars, seasoned veterans in their own right, began showing up not just to refuel or grab a meal, but to lend quiet support. Marcus sat at his usual spot, noting each familiar face as they entered. Big Steve Johnson, a burly ex-Army Ranger, took a seat by the window, his massive frame intimidating without effort. A table over, Mike Doc Wilson, a former combat medic turned trucker, sipped his coffee, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Every trucker who entered brought a sense of calm, deliberate readiness. They weren't there for trouble, but trouble would find resistance waiting if it showed up. Beth noticed the growing crowd and leaned toward Marcus. "Friends of yours?" Marcus gave a slight nod. "More like kindred spirits. They know what's at stake." The familiar chime of the door opening brought Sheriff Cooper back into the diner. His expression was tight, worry evident as he scanned the room. He made a beeline for Marcus, pulling up a stool next to him. "Got some bad news," Cooper said under his breath. "The road wolves are recruiting. We've had reports of bikers gathering at nearby stops, probably prospects from other chapters." Marcus remained unfazed. "Let them gather. Numbers don't mean much if they don't know how to use them." Cooper sighed, lowering his voice. "Marcus, I've got 2 deputies. That's it. If they hit us in force, I can't hold them back." "You won't have to," Marcus replied. "This isn't about law enforcement. It's about community. And as you can see, the community is already showing up." As the sheriff glanced around the room, the door chimed again, and 2 more truckers entered. Both nodded briefly at Marcus before settling into seats that gave them a clear view of the lot outside. "You've got a lot of faith in these guys," Cooper said. "Not faith," Marcus corrected. "Experience." The distant rumble of engines rolled through the night air, growing louder with each passing second. Conversation in the diner hushed as the sound became unmistakable. "They're back," Jenny whispered, her voice trembling. The bikers arrived en masse this time. 10 motorcycles roared into the lot, their riders dismounting in near unison. At the center of the group stood Hammer and Snake, flanked by newcomers with hard eyes and confident gaits. From inside the diner, Marcus observed their movements. His gaze lingered on the newcomers, each one younger and cockier than the last. Hammer strutted toward the door, his swagger more pronounced than ever. This time, he wasn't just here to intimidate. He was here to stake a claim. The diner grew still as the door swung open and the bikers entered. They didn't hesitate, fanning out as they made their presence known. A few patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but the truckers remained calm, their quiet confidence an unspoken message to the intruders. Hammer approached the counter, leaning over it with a sneer. "Evening, Beth," he drawled. "What's the special tonight? Or do we just help ourselves?" Beth's hands trembled as she gripped the counter. "We're closed for private business," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. Snake chuckled, taking a seat at a nearby table. "Looks open to me," he said, kicking a chair out with his foot and settling in. Marcus stood, his chair scraping against the floor. He stepped forward, his posture relaxed but his presence commanding. "Time to leave," he said. Hammer laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You're cute, old man, but we're not going anywhere. In fact," he turned to his crew, "I think we're just getting comfortable." The bikers laughed, their voices grating against the tension in the room. One of the newcomers reached for a sugar dispenser, tossing it back and forth between his hands as he grinned at Marcus. Big Steve cleared his throat, drawing attention to his towering presence by the window. "You boys seem lost," he said. "This isn't your kind of place." The newcomer sneered. "And what are you going to do about it, Grandpa?" Steve's smile didn't waver. "Stick around. You'll find out." The tension was palpable now, the air thick with the weight of unspoken threats. Hammer's confidence flickered, his eyes darting to the truckers scattered around the room. Something about their stillness, their calculated positions, began to unsettle him. "Enough of this," Hammer barked. "We're done playing nice." Snake reached for his belt, pulling a chain free with a sharp clink. The younger bikers followed suit, producing weapons ranging from knives to crowbars. Marcus didn't move. His voice, calm and resolute, cut through the din. "You really want to do this?" Hammer hesitated, his bravado cracking under Marcus's unwavering gaze. But before he could respond, the door swung open, and Sheriff Cooper stepped inside. The bikers froze, their weapons hovering midair. Behind the sheriff, the glow of blue and red lights illuminated the lot. "You boys better have a good reason for being here," Cooper said, his hand resting casually on his holster. Hammer spat on the floor, his frustration boiling over. "You think a badge is going to scare us off?" Cooper smirked. "No, but I think the consequences might." The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, the sheriff's calm confidence adding to the truckers' silent resolve. The odds weren't in their favor, and they knew it. With a sneer, Hammer backed toward the door, motioning for his crew to follow. "This ain't over," he growled. "No," Marcus agreed, his tone as steady as ever. "It's just beginning." The bikers filed out, their bravado noticeably diminished. As their engines roared to life and faded into the night, the tension in the diner eased. Marcus turned to the gathered truckers. "Next time, they won't stop at intimidation," he said grimly. "We need to prepare." Big Steve nodded, his face hard with determination. "Just say the word." Marcus's gaze swept the room, landing on each person who had silently chosen to stand with him. "Let's show them what happens when they target the wrong place." Marcus Davidson stood at the counter, his steaming coffee untouched as he reviewed the situation with Sheriff Cooper. Around them, the diner bustled with a quiet, purposeful energy. What had been a sanctuary for weary travelers had transformed into a strategic hub. Beth watched from behind the counter as Marcus gestured to a highway map spread out before him. His voice, calm but firm, carried across the room. "The road wolves think they've cornered us. What they don't realize is that we're not alone." Cooper nodded grimly. "I've got a couple of deputies I trust, but that's it. We're outnumbered and outgunned." "Not for long," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. The bell above the diner door chimed, drawing their attention. Big Steve Johnson entered, his hulking presence immediately commanding respect. Behind him were two other men, Jack "Iron Hand" Carter, a retired Navy SEAL with a prosthetic arm, and Carl Martinez, a mechanic and Army Corps of Engineers veteran. "Thought you might need some extra hands," Steve said, his deep voice filling the room. Marcus greeted them with a nod, a rare smile touching his lips. "Glad you're here." Iron Hand stepped forward, his prosthetic clicking as he moved. "What's the situation?" Marcus pointed to the map. "They'll hit us hard, probably within the next day or two. We need to control access to the lot and prepare for a fight." Carl rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I can set up barriers. Got some scrap concrete and steel back at the shop. Might take a few hours, but it'll hold." "Do it," Marcus said. "Make sure there's a clear choke point. We'll decide where the fight happens." The diner buzzed with quiet conversation as more allies arrived. Doc Wilson organized medical supplies in a corner booth, his years as a combat medic making him the natural choice for Tria. Jenny, though nervous, worked alongside him, determined to be useful. Beth joined Marcus at the counter, her expression a mix of worry and resolve. "Marcus, I don't know if I can do this. I'm just a diner owner." Marcus turned to her, his voice steady. "You're more than that, Beth. This is your home, your livelihood. If anyone has the right to stand up, it's you." Beth swallowed hard, nodding. "What do you need me to do?" "Keep morale high," Marcus said. "And make sure everyone gets fed. We need them sharp and ready." Outside, Carl and his crew worked tirelessly, positioning concrete barriers and setting up floodlights. Their voices carried over the hum of machinery as they welded makeshift barricades into place. Inside, Iron Hand gathered the truckers for a briefing. "Most of you have military experience, so you know the drill. Stay calm, stay focused, and watch each other's backs. If they come, we hold the line." Big Steve chimed in. "And remember, this isn't just about us. It's about showing them they can't take whatever they want." As the preparations continued, a lull settled over the diner. People gathered in small groups, sharing stories and memories. It was a brief but powerful moment of connection. Jenny approached Marcus with 2 cups of coffee, handing him one. "I don't understand how you stay so calm," she said, her voice trembling. Marcus took a sip, his gaze distant. "I've seen worse," he admitted. "But it's not about being calm. It's about being ready." Jenny hesitated. "Do you think we'll win?" "We don't have to win," Marcus replied. "We just have to make sure they lose." Nearby, Doc Wilson sat with Beth, recounting a story from his time in Afghanistan. "It was a lot like this," he said. "Outnumbered, outgunned, but we had each other. That's what made the difference." Beth smiled faintly. "I just hope we're enough." "You're enough," Doc said firmly. "Trust me." As night fell, The truck stop took on a new energy. More allies arrived, truckers, locals, and even a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Connolly, who brought maps and surveillance reports she had gathered from her time in military intelligence. "I heard what you're up against," she said, laying out the reports on a table. "I'm not much for fighting, but I can help you track their movements." Marcus studied the reports, nodding in approval. "Every bit helps," he said. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Crossroads Truck Stop was no longer just a diner. It was a fortress, a beacon of resistance against the looming threat. Big Steve approached Marcus, his expression serious. "The barriers are up and the lot secure. What's next?" Marcus glanced around the room, taking in the faces of those who had rallied to the cause. "Next," he said, "we make sure they know this is a fight they can't win." By the time the preparations were nearing completion, the truck stop had become a hive of strategic activity. In one corner of the diner, Carl Martinez and his crew finalized blueprints for the barriers, while Doc Wilson mapped out an emergency evacuation route in case things turned south. Marcus moved from table to table, his presence steadying those who had chosen to stand with him. The first test of their defenses came just after sundown, ting idle as he surveyed the scene. From the shadows near the barricades, Big Steve called out, "You lost, friend." The biker didn't respond immediately. He dismounted, his boots crunching against the gravel as he walked a few paces closer. "Nice setup you've got here," he finally said, his voice carrying a mocking edge. "What's all this?" "Some kind of welcome party." "Something like that," Steve replied, his tone even. The biker smirked, taking a slow drag from his cigarette. "Hammer wanted me to let you know he'll be back real soon. And he won't be alone." Marcus stepped into view, his silhouette framed by the diner's lights. "Tell Hammer we'll be ready," he said calmly. The biker's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before he flicked his cigarette onto the ground. "Your funeral, old man," he muttered before mounting his bike and roaring off into the night. Inside the diner, Marcus gathered the core team for a final strategy session. Around the table were Big Steve, Iron Hand, Doc Wilson, Carl Martinez, Sheriff Cooper, and Mrs. Connolly. The air was heavy with anticipation. Marcus pointed to the map, spread out before them. "The road wolves will come in force. They'll try to overwhelm us with numbers, create chaos, and push us into making mistakes. That's their playbook." "We're ready for that," Carl said confidently. "The barriers will funnel them into choke points. They'll have no choice but to come at us head-on." Iron Hand tapped the table with his prosthetic. "And when they do, we've got the advantage. This isn't just a random brawl for us, it's strategy." Mrs. Connolly added, "I've been tracking their movements since the first encounter. My guess is they'll come from both the north and south entrances, hoping to split our attention." Marcus nodded. "That's why we have to stay disciplined. No one acts alone. We hold the line, no matter what." Sheriff Cooper leaned forward. "And what about the civilians? Beth, Jenny, the rest of the staff? If this turns into an all-out fight, they'll be at risk." "I've already spoken with Beth," Marcus replied. "We'll move them to the reinforced office once things start. It's not perfect, but it's the safest place in the building." Doc Wilson chimed in. "I've set up a triage station in the back. Hopefully we won't need it, but it's there." The group fell silent for a moment, the weight of the coming confrontation settling over them. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice steady but resolute. "This isn't just about protecting a truck stop. It's about showing them that communities like ours won't be bullied. They think they're strong because they have numbers, but we're stronger because we have each other." Rallying the locals. As word of the impending showdown spread, more locals began arriving at Crossroads. A retired firefighter named Bill brought walkie-talkies and emergency flares, while a young farmer, Sam, donated several bales of hay to block off additional access points. Beth, despite her nerves, organized a late-night meal for everyone, insisting that no one would face the road wolves on an empty stomach. "If we're doing this," she said with a shaky smile, "we're doing it right." Jenny, too, found her courage. She moved from table to table, refilling coffee cups and cracking nervous jokes to lighten the mood. "We're going to need a bigger tip jar after this," she quipped, drawing a few chuckles. Even Sheriff Cooper's deputies, though few in number, arrived to lend a hand. They set up mobile floodlights around the lot, casting long shadows that danced eerily against the barricades. "Every bit helps," Marcus told them. "When they see those lights, they'll know we're not hiding." As midnight approached, the activity slowed. People settled into their positions, the final preparations complete. The truck stop was quiet now, save for the hum of the floodlights and the occasional murmur of conversation. Marcus found a moment to sit with Beth at the counter. She poured him a fresh cup of coffee, her hands steady despite the tension in the air. "Did you ever think your diner would turn into a fortress?" Marcus asked with a wry smile. Beth laughed softly, shaking her head. "Not in a million years. But if it has to, I'm glad you're here to lead us." Marcus's expression softened. "It's not about me. It's about all of us. This place is more than just a truck stop. It's a lifeline for the people who pass through, for the community it supports. That's worth fighting for." Across the room, Big Steve sat with Doc Wilson and Iron Hand, sharing stories from their military days. The camaraderie in their laughter was a stark contrast to the tension that hung over the night. "It's funny," Doc said, leaning back in his chair. "We've all been in bigger fights than this, but something about this feels different." "It's because it's home," Steve replied. "Out there, we fought for survival. Here, we're fighting for something that matters." The calm before the storm. As the clock struck 1 a.m., Marcus made his rounds one final time, checking in with each team. He found Carl by the barricades, double-checking their stability. "They'll hold," Carl said confidently. "And if they don't, we've got a plan B." Inside, Mrs. Connolly sat by the surveillance monitors, her sharp eyes tracking every movement outside. "Nothing yet," she reported. "But they'll come. It's just a matter of time." Marcus returned to the diner and addressed the group. "Get some rest if you can," he said. "It'll be a long night, and we need to be sharp when they show up." The room fell quiet as people settled into their positions, their resolve unshaken. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of distant motorcycles, a reminder that the fight was drawing closer. Standing by the window, Marcus gazed into the night, his mind calm and focused. Whatever came next, he knew they were ready. The distant rumble of engines grew louder, a low growl that sent ripples of tension through the truck stop. Marcus stood at the diner window, watching as the sound swelled, the glow of headlights reflecting off the makeshift barricades. "They're here," Big Steve said, stepping into the diner, his shadows stretching across the floor. His voice was calm, but his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The veterans and locals gathered quickly, taking their positions as Marcus moved to the center of the room. "Everyone knows the plan," he said, his voice cutting through the rising tension. "Stay disciplined, stay focused, and remember, this isn't about winning. It's about making them lose." Outside, the road wolves began arriving in waves. The first group of bikes roared into the lot, their riders clad in leather and menace. At the head of the pack was Hammer, his grizzled face twisted into a smirk. Snake followed closely behind, his sneer barely concealed as he scanned the diner's windows. Behind them, more bikers arrived, parking in a deliberate show of force. Within minutes, nearly 24 motorcycles lined the lot, their engines revving in an intimidating symphony. From the barricades, Carl Martinez and his crew observed silently. Carl's hand rested on a crowbar, his stance steady. "They're testing us," he muttered to one of his team, "trying to see if we'll break." Hammer dismounted his bike, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached the barricade. "Evening, boys," he called out, his voice thick with mockery. "I see you've been busy." Carl didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the group behind Hammer. Snake stepped forward, a chain swinging lazily from his hand. "What's the matter?" he sneered. "Cat got your tongue?" From the shadows, Marcus stepped into view, his silhouette stark against the floodlights. "You've made your point," he said, his tone steady. "Now it's time for you to leave." Hammer laughed, a harsh bark that echoed across the lot. "Leave? Oh no, old man. We're just getting started." He turned to his crew and motioned toward the barricades. "Take them down." The bikers surged forward, chains and bats in hand. Carl and his team held their ground, their movements deliberate and controlled. As the first biker reached the barricade, Carl swung his crowbar in a wide arc, knocking the man's weapon from his hand. Behind him, Big Steve moved with precision, blocking another attacker and sending him sprawling with a single, well-placed shove. The veterans worked in tandem, their training evident in every calculated move. Inside the diner, the tension reached a boiling point. Doc Wilson positioned himself by the entrance, a makeshift first aid station already set up in the corner. Jenny stood nearby, her phone clutched tightly in her hands as she recorded the unfolding chaos. Beth peeked out from the kitchen, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the counter. "How bad is it?" she whispered to Sheriff Cooper, who stood by the door with his hand on his holster. "Bad," Cooper replied. "But they're holding." Outside, the battle intensified. Hammer, seeing his men struggle against the veterans, barked orders from the rear. "Hit them harder. Break through." Snake led a second charge, his chain whistling through the air as he swung it at Big Steve. Steve caught the chain mid-swing, yanking Snake off balance before delivering a punishing blow that sent him to the ground. Carl and his team adjusted their positions, using the barricades to funnel the attackers into narrow spaces. Each move was deliberate, designed to control the chaos. From his vantage point, Marcus observed the fight, his mind racing through contingencies. He noticed Hammer signaling to a group of bikers near the rear. They began moving toward the diner's side entrance, a clear attempt to flank the defenders. "Steve," Marcus called out, his voice cutting through the noise. "They're splitting up." Steve nodded, rallying two other veterans to cover the side entrance. They moved swiftly, intercepting the flanking group before they could gain ground. Inside the diner, Marcus turned to Sheriff Cooper. "Get everyone to the back room," he ordered. "We can't risk civilians getting caught in this." Beth hesitated, her eyes darting to the chaos outside. "But..." "No arguments," Marcus said firmly. "Go." Beth and Jenny hurried to the reinforced office, guiding the few remaining patrons to safety. Doc Wilson stayed behind, his focus on preparing for any injuries that might come his way. The sound of shattering glass drew everyone's attention as a biker threw a brick through one of the diner's windows. Hammer's voice rang out, taunting them. "Come on out, Davidson. Let's see what you've got." Marcus stepped to the window, his expression calm, but deadly serious. "I told you," he said, his voice carrying across the lot. "This isn't your fight to win." Turning the tide. The bikers' confidence began to waver as their attacks were met with fierce resistance. Big Steve and Iron Hand worked in perfect synchronization, their every move forcing the road wolves back. Hammer, realizing his men were losing ground, roared in frustration. "Enough," he shouted, pulling a pistol from his waistband. He pointed it toward the barricade, his finger hovering over the trigger. Before he could act, the sharp crack of a warning shot echoed through the night. Sheriff Cooper stood on the diner's porch, his revolver raised. "Drop it," he commanded, his voice like steel. Hammer hesitated, his eyes darting between the sheriff and Marcus. The tension hung thick in the air as the bikers froze, unsure of their next move. "This is your last chance," Marcus said, stepping forward. "Walk away while you still can." Hammer's grip on the pistol tightened, his pride warring with his instincts. Finally, he snarled and lowered the weapon. "This ain't over," he spat, backing toward his bike. The bikers began retreating, their confidence shattered. Engines roared to life as they mounted their bikes and sped off into the night. As the last of the road wolves disappeared, the defenders lowered their weapons, the adrenaline slowly ebbing from their veins. Marcus turned to Big Steve and the others. "Good work," he said. "But they'll be back. And next time, they won't hold back." Doc Wilson emerged from the diner, wiping his hands on a towel. "Everyone okay?" "No injuries," Steve replied. "Just a lot of bruised egos." Beth and Jenny stepped out of the office, relief evident on their faces. "Is it over?" Jenny asked. "For now," Marcus said. But this was just the beginning. They'll regroup, and they'll come harder next time. Beth placed a hand on Marcus's arm. "Then we'll be ready." Marcus nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. They wanted a fight, he said quietly. Now they've got one. The aftermath of the skirmish left a charged stillness hanging over Crossroads Truck Stop. The defenders regrouped, exhaustion creeping in, but their resolve remained unshaken. Marcus took a slow lap around the barricades, checking on each person, his sharp gaze missing nothing. Any damage? He asked Carl Martinez, who was crouched beside a barricade inspecting a crack in one of the concrete blocks. Nothing major, Carl replied, brushing off his hands as he stood. The barriers held up fine. Took a few hits, but nothing we can't fix. Marcus nodded. Good. Let's make sure everything's reinforced before they try again. Carl hesitated, glancing toward the horizon where the taillights of the retreating bikers had vanished. They'll come back angry, he said. You think we're ready for that? Marcus met his gaze, his voice steady. We don't have a choice but to be. As dawn approached, a convoy of trucks rolled into the lot, their engines rumbling softly as they parked in a neat line. Marcus stepped out to greet them, his brow furrowed in curiosity. The lead driver, a wiry man with a grizzled beard, climbed out and extended a hand. Name's Red, he said. Heard you've got a bit of a wolf problem. Marcus shook his hand, his expression still wary. How'd you hear about it? Truckers talk, Red replied with a grin. Word's out that some bikers are trying to strong-arm Crossroads. Figured we'd swing by and see if you needed a hand. Behind Red, a dozen other truckers emerged from their rigs. Some carried tools, others brought supplies, and a few simply stood ready, their postures speaking of a readiness to fight. Big Steve clapped Marcus on the shoulder, grinning. Looks like reinforcements just arrived. Marcus addressed the group, his tone measured. We appreciate the help, but I won't lie to you. This isn't just about protecting a truck stop. The road wolves are part of something bigger, a cartel pushing drugs through the region. Standing with us means making yourself a target. Red shrugged. We've been targets before. Besides, this place has always been a safe haven for drivers. We're not about to let some punks ruin that. Marcus's gaze swept over the group, their faces resolute. All right then, he said. Let's get to work. The day was spent fortifying the defenses. Under Carl's direction, the truckers used steel beams and wooden planks to reinforce the barricades, ensuring they could withstand another assault. Inside the diner, Mrs. Connolly worked with Sheriff Cooper to update their surveillance and communications network. We've spotted at least 3 more bikers scouting the area, she reported. They're testing us, looking for weaknesses. Let them, Cooper replied, his tone grim. They'll find nothing they can exploit. Doc Wilson and Jenny set up additional medical supplies in the back room, preparing for the worst. Jenny's hands trembled as she sorted bandages, but her resolve never wavered. Beth moved through the diner, handing out sandwiches and coffee to the workers. I still can't believe this is happening, she admitted to Marcus when she found him at the counter. Marcus took the cup of coffee she offered, his expression unreadable. People like the road wolves count on fear to get what they want, he said. They think if they push hard enough, people will fold. We're showing them that won't happen here. Meanwhile, the road wolves weren't idle. At a dusty roadhouse a few miles away, Hammer slammed his fist on the bar, sending a beer bottle crashing to the floor. That old man humiliated us, he roared, his voice echoing through the room. Snake, nursing a bruised rib, leaned back in his chair with a sneer. They've got more fight in them than we expected. Hammer shot him a glare. That's no excuse. We've got the numbers. Next time, we hit them hard, no holding back. A new voice cut through the conversation. You'd better do more than hit hard. The room fell silent as Diego Ramirez entered, his presence commanding. The cartel leader's tailored suit was an odd contrast to the biker's rough leather, but his cold eyes silenced any dissent. You've already embarrassed my operation once, Ramirez said, his voice low but menacing. I won't tolerate another failure. Hammer swallowed hard, his bravado fading. We'll handle it. You'd better, Ramirez said. Because if you don't, I'll make sure you regret it. Back at Crossroads, night fell, and the truck stop grew quiet. The floodlights cast long shadows across the barricades, and the air was thick with anticipation. Marcus gathered his team in the diner for a final briefing. "We've done everything we can to prepare," he said, his voice steady. "Now we wait. They'll come when they think we're vulnerable." "What makes you so sure?"
Jenny asked.
"Because people like them can't let a challenge go unanswered," Marcus replied. "They see it as weakness. They'll come to prove a point." Sheriff Cooper nodded. "And we'll be ready." The attack came in the dead of night. The first sign was the faint roar of engines in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Marcus stood at the barricades, his eyes fixed on the dark horizon. "They're coming," Big Steve said, stepping up beside him. "I see them," Marcus replied. The bikers appeared moments later, their headlights piercing the darkness. This time, there were more of them. At least 30 riders, their numbers bolstered by recruits from neighboring chapters. Hammer led the charge, his bike roaring as he approached the barricades. He stopped just short, his voice carrying across the lot. "You should have walked away when you had the chance, Davidson." Marcus didn't flinch. "You should have stayed gone when you had the chance, Hammer." Hammer's face twisted in anger. "Take them down," he bellowed. The bikers surged forward, their weapons gleaming in the harsh floodlights. Marcus raised his hand, signaling his team. "Hold the line," he shouted. The defenders braced themselves as the road wolves slammed into the barricades. Chains clanged against steel, and bats splintered against wood. The veterans held firm, their discipline and training shining through as they pushed back against the onslaught. Inside the diner, Jenny and Beth huddled in the reinforced office, listening to the chaos outside. Jenny's heart pounded as she clutched her phone, ready to call for help if needed. Back outside, the fight intensified. Marcus moved with precision, his every action calculated. Beside him, Big Steve and Iron Hand fought with unyielding strength, their movements a testament to years of training and experience. After what felt like an eternity, the bikers began to falter. One by one, they retreated, their confidence shattered by the defenders' resilience. Hammer, bloodied but unbroken, glared at Marcus from atop his bike. "This isn't over," he spat before roaring off into the night. Marcus watched them go, his expression unreadable. "No," he said quietly. "It's just beginning." The aftermath of the second attack left the truck stop in a fragile calm. The barricades, though battered, still stood, and the defenders had held their ground. But the tension in the air was palpable, an unspoken understanding that the road wolves weren't finished. Marcus Davidson stood outside the diner, his arms crossed as he surveyed the lot. The faint orange glow of the approaching sunrise painted the horizon, but the beauty of the moment was lost on him. His mind raced through the events of the night, dissecting every move, every decision, every weakness that had nearly been exploited. Big Steve joined him, his massive hands resting on his hips. "They'll be back," he said, breaking the silence. "I know," Marcus replied. "You did good tonight," Steve continued. "We all did. But I can see it on your face. You're thinking it wasn't enough." Marcus sighed, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. "We're holding, but just barely. Every time they come back, they're stronger, more organized. They're testing us, Steve, and sooner or later, they'll find a way through." The weight of leadership. Inside the diner, Beth was cleaning up shattered glass from the broken window. Her movements were mechanical, her expression distant. Jenny sat at a nearby booth, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. "Beth," Jenny said softly. Beth paused, looking up. Do you think we can win?" Jenny's voice trembled, and her wide eyes betrayed the fear she'd been trying to hide. Beth hesitated, glancing toward the back of the diner where Marcus and the others were gathered. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I trust Marcus. If anyone can get us through this, it's him." Outside, Marcus turned to Steve. "I need to take a walk," he said. Steve frowned. "You sure? We've got it covered here." "I'll be back soon," Marcus said. A moment of solitude. Marcus walked to the edge of the truck stop, his boots crunching against the gravel. The open highway stretched before him, a reminder of the countless miles he had traveled in his lifetime. But now, the road felt like a prison. Every turn led back to this fight, this moment, this impossible choice. He stopped at a rusted old bench near the edge of the lot and sat down, his head bowed. The years had weighed heavily on him, but nothing compared to the burden he carried now. Lives depended on his decisions, and the line between survival and failure felt razor-thin. Memories surfaced, unbidden. The heat of the desert sun during his tours overseas. The shouts of his squad as they cleared buildings, never knowing what waited on the other side. The sharp crack of gunfire that had taken his closest friend. "You're still fighting battles, aren't you?" A voice interrupted his thoughts. Marcus looked up to see Mrs. Connolly standing nearby, her hands clasped in front of her. She had a way of moving so quietly that he hadn't noticed her approach. "Something like that," Marcus admitted. Mrs. Connolly sat beside him, her sharp eyes studying his face. "You've carried a lot, Marcus. More than most men could bear." "It's not about what I can bear," Marcus said. "It's about what I can't let happen. I've seen what people like the road wolves do when no one stands up to them. I can't let them win." She nodded thoughtfully. "And yet, you doubt yourself." Marcus exhaled deeply. "Every leader doubts. If they say otherwise, they're lying."
"True," she said.
"But you're not just a leader, Marcus. You're a symbol. To the people in that diner, you're the reason they haven't given up. Don't underestimate the power of that." Marcus looked at her, her words sinking in. "And what happens if I fail?" Mrs. Connolly smiled faintly. "You won't. But even if you did, you've already shown them how to stand." A glimpse into the past. As the sun rose higher, Marcus's thoughts drifted further back. He hadn't always been the man people relied on. Before the Marines, he had been a restless kid from a broken home, angry at the world and looking for a fight. The military had given him purpose, structure, and discipline, but it had also taken a toll. The missions blurred together, each one leaving scars he couldn't show. And when he finally came home, he struggled to find his place. It wasn't until he stumbled upon Crossroads Truck Stop years ago that he began to feel human again. Beth had been one of the first people to welcome him without judgment, offering a cup of coffee and a listening ear. Over time, the truck stop became more than a rest point, it became a home. And now that home was under siege, returning to the fight. When Marcus returned to the diner, the atmosphere had shifted. The defenders were tired, but their determination had not wavered. Big Steve and Iron Hand were leading drills in the lot, teaching some of the newer recruits how to handle basic combat scenarios. Beth approached Marcus as he stepped inside. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle.
"Ai fine," Marcus replied.
"Liar," Beth said with a small smile. "But I won't press you. Just don't carry it all by yourself, okay?" Marcus gave her a rare smile. "I'll try." A new resolve. That evening, Marcus called a meeting in the diner. Everyone gathered around, their faces a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. "We've been tested," Marcus began, his voice carrying the weight of his experience. "And we've held the line. But make no mistake, they'll come again, and they'll come harder. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about sending a message to anyone who thinks they can take what isn't theirs." He looked around the room, meeting each person's gaze. "This fight isn't just mine. It's ours. And together, we're going to make sure the road wolves understand one thing. They picked the wrong place, the wrong people, and the wrong fight." The room erupted in quiet cheers, the renewed resolve palpable. As the meeting broke up, Marcus lingered near the window, watching the horizon once more. For the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope. The diner hummed with quiet energy as Marcus's words sank in. People moved with purpose, their steps steadier, their resolve solidified. But Marcus knew that inspiring others was only part of the equation. He still had to wrestle with the ghosts of his own doubts and failures. Later that evening, Marcus stepped outside into the cool night air. The floodlights illuminated the barricades, casting long shadows over the lot. The faint chirping of crickets was the only sound, a fragile calm that felt like the eye of a storm. He walked toward a bench at the edge of the lot, his thoughts a tangled mess of strategy and reflection. The faces of his old squad haunted him, a reminder of battles won but lives lost. For years, He had buried the pain under layers of stoicism, but tonight it crept back, as relentless as the road wolves themselves. "I thought I might find you here," a voice called out behind him. Marcus turned to see Big Steve approaching, his hulking frame silhouetted against the floodlights. He carried 2 mugs of steaming coffee, handing one to Marcus as he sat down beside him. "You've been awfully quiet tonight," Steve said, taking a sip. "Just thinking," Marcus replied. "About the wolves?" "About everything," Marcus admitted. "We've got the people, the plan, and the will. But every time I think we've done enough, I wonder if it'll be enough to hold them off." Steve leaned back, his gaze fixed on the barricades. "You're not wrong to worry. A good leader always questions their choices. But let me tell you something, Marcus. What you've done here, it's more than enough. You've got a whole town standing behind you because they believe in you." Marcus chuckled softly. "You give me too much credit." Steve shook his head. "No, I don't. You're not just holding a line out there. You're holding us together." Testing loyalties. Inside the diner, tensions simmered among the defenders. Most were united, but cracks began to form in the group's solidarity. Not everyone was prepared for the level of danger they now faced. At one of the booths, a trucker named Earl voiced his doubts to Carl Martinez. "Look, man, I didn't sign up for this kind of fight. These guys are armed, and I've got a family to think about." Carl, busy sketching reinforcements for the barricades, didn't look up. "We all have something to lose, Earl. That's why we're here." "Yeah, but maybe there's a way out that doesn't end with us getting shot," Earl pressed. Carl finally set down his pencil and looked Earl in the eye. "If there's a way to avoid this, don't you think Marcus would have taken it? These guys don't back off unless someone forces them to. If you leave now, you're just giving them the green light to keep doing what they're doing." Earl hesitated, his expression torn. "I just don't know if I've got it in me." Carl's tone softened. "None of us know, Earl. But sometimes you just have to stand your ground and find out." A revelation in the quiet. As the night deepened, Marcus found himself alone again, standing at the edge of the barricades. The memories of his past battles were relentless tonight, their weight heavier than ever. He remembered the last mission he had led, a brutal operation that had gone sideways. His squad had been ambushed, and though they completed the mission, the cost had been staggering. For men lost under his command. 4 faces that never left him. Marcus clenched his fists, his jaw tightening as he replayed the events in his mind. The doubts whispered to him, "What if you make the wrong call again? What if people die because of you, Marcus?" He turned to see Mrs. Connolly approaching, her sharp eyes studying him. She carried a small tin in her hands, which she offered to him. "What's this?" he asked. "Tea," she replied. "It helps with thinking." Marcus accepted it with a small nod. "Thanks." She didn't leave. Instead, she stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You're carrying a lot," she said softly. "You noticed, huh?" Marcus replied with a wry smile. "You're a leader," she said. "It's written all over you." But leaders forget that they don't have to carry everything alone. Marcus looked at her, the weight of her words settling over him. "I'm not sure I know how to let go of it." Mrs. Connolly smiled faintly. "You're not supposed to let go. You're supposed to share it. That's what this fight is about, isn't it? Community. Trust." He nodded slowly, the tightness in his chest easing just a fraction. The team comes together. Inside the diner, the defenders began to find their rhythm again. Doc Wilson walked Jenny through basic first aid procedures, her initial nerves giving way to quiet determination. Beth made sandwiches in the kitchen, her movements steady and confident. Big Steve and Iron Hand worked with Carl to reinforce the barricades, their shared camaraderie a balm against the tension. Even Earl, though still uncertain, helped unload supplies from a nearby truck. Marcus stepped back into the diner and watched as the group worked together. For the first time that night, he felt a glimmer of something stronger than resolve, hope. A pivotal decision. As the night wore on, Marcus called a meeting with the core team. Around the table were Big Steve, Iron Hand, Carl, Mrs. Connolly, and Sheriff Cooper. "I've been thinking," Marcus began, his tone serious. The wolves aren't just going to hit us again, they're going to try to break us. We need to hit back before they get the chance. Big Steve raised an eyebrow. You mean go on the offensive? Marcus nodded. We've been reacting to them this whole time. It's time to change the game. We know where they're holed up. If we strike first, we can take out their leadership and send a message that we're not just defending, we're fighting back. The room fell silent as the weight of Marcus's plan sank in. It's risky, Sheriff Cooper said finally, but it could work. Marcus looked around the table, meeting each person's gaze. This is your call too. If we do this, we do it together. One by one, they nodded, their resolve solidified. Then it's settled, Marcus said. At dawn, we take the fight to them. Dawn broke over the horizon. The sky streaked with shades of orange and gold, but the beauty of the morning did little to ease the tension among the defenders. The team gathered in the diner, their faces drawn but resolute. Cups of coffee were passed around, and the soft murmur of last-minute preparations filled the room. Marcus stood at the center of the group, his calm presence commanding their attention. He pointed to a map spread across the counter, his finger tracing the route to the Road Wolves' hideout, a rundown roadhouse a few miles down the highway. We've scouted their position, he began. Hammer and Snake are holed up there with their crew, and based on last night, they'll be planning a full-scale assault to finish what they started. Big Steve leaned over the map, his brow furrowed. How many are we expecting? 30, maybe more, Marcus replied. But they won't be ready for us to come to them. Sheriff Cooper chimed in. We'll coordinate a roadblock down the highway to cut off any reinforcements. If we move quickly, we can catch them off guard. Mrs. Connolly tapped a stack of photos on the counter. Their defenses are weak here, she said, pointing to the back of the roadhouse. A small team could breach this area while the main group holds their attention at the front. Marcus nodded.
Good.
Carl, you and your crew will secure the rear. Steve, Iron Hand, and I will lead the charge at the front. Doc, you'll stay here with Jenny and Beth to hold down the diner in case any stragglers come looking for trouble. Doc Wilson frowned, but didn't argue. Just don't bring too many injuries back for me to patch up, he said with a wry smile. The plan in motion. The convoy set out just after sunrise. Trucks and SUVs rolled down the highway in a tight formation, their headlights cutting through the morning mist. The mood was somber but focused, the defenders steeling themselves for what lay ahead. As they approached the roadhouse, Marcus signaled for the vehicles to stop. They pulled off the road into a nearby clearing, engines going silent as everyone disembarked. Marcus addressed the group one last time. We go in fast, hit them hard, and get out before they have a chance to regroup. Stick to your teams, watch each other's backs, and remember, we're doing this to protect what's ours. The group nodded in unison, their expressions grim but determined. The assault begins. The first shot was fired just as the convoy reached the roadhouse. Sheriff Cooper's deputies, stationed at the highway, had intercepted a biker attempting to flee, their presence alerting the wolves inside. Marcus and his team wasted no time. They stormed the front of the roadhouse, Big Steve and Iron Hand leading the charge with precision and force. The bikers, caught off guard, scrambled to mount a defense. Hammer emerged from the building, barking orders. Hold them off. Don't let them through. Snake appeared moments later, his chain swinging as he rallied a smaller group toward the rear. They're splitting up. Get back there and stop them. Inside the roadhouse, chaos erupted. Tables were overturned, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and sweat. Marcus moved with calculated precision, his every step deliberate as he directed his team. Big Steve tackled a biker who lunged at him with a bat, slamming him to the ground with a bone-rattling thud. Iron Hand used his prosthetic arm to block an attack before disarming his opponent with a swift strike. The rear assault. At the back of the roadhouse, Carl and his crew moved quickly. Using tools from his workshop, Carl dismantled a section of the chain-link fence, creating a clear path for his team to enter. They encountered resistance almost immediately. A group of bikers rushed to intercept them, wielding weapons improvised from tools and scrap metal. Carl swung his crowbar with practiced efficiency, blocking an attack and retaliating with a swift blow that sent his opponent sprawling. His crew followed suit, using their tools and wits to outmaneuver the bikers. Push forward, Carl shouted. We've got them on the run. The final stand. Back at the front, Marcus and Hammer finally came face to face. The two men locked eyes across the chaotic scene, the weight of their confrontation palpable. Hammer sneered, his pistol drawn. You think you've won, old man? He growled. You've got no idea who you're messing with. Marcus didn't flinch. I know exactly who I'm messing with, he said, his voice calm but firm. And I know exactly how this ends. Hammer fired, the shot cracking through the air. Marcus dove behind an overturned table, the bullet splintering the wood. From his cover, Marcus fired back, forcing Hammer to retreat. Meanwhile, Snake circled around, his chain whistling as he swung it at Big Steve. Steve caught the chain midair, yanking Snake off balance before delivering a brutal punch that sent him sprawling. Iron Hand joined Marcus, covering him as they advanced on Hammer's position. The bikers, now disorganized and demoralized, began to fall back. You're done, Hammer, Marcus called out, his voice carrying over the chaos. Hammer, cornered and furious, raised his weapon again. But before he could fire, Sheriff Cooper appeared, his revolver trained on Hammer. Drop it, Cooper commanded. Hammer hesitated, his bravado finally faltering. Slowly, he lowered his weapon and raised his hands. Victory for now. As the last of the bikers were subdued or fled, the defenders regrouped. The roadhouse was eerily quiet now, the adrenaline of the fight giving way to exhaustion. Marcus stood over Hammer, who was on his knees, hands cuffed behind his back. It's over, Marcus said. Hammer glared up at him. You think this changes anything? There's always someone bigger, someone meaner. Maybe, Marcus replied, but not today. Not here. Reflection. As the convoy returned to Crossroads Truck Stop, the team was greeted with cheers from those who had stayed behind. Beth and Jenny rushed out to meet them, relief evident on their faces. We did it, Big Steve said, clapping Marcus on the back. Marcus nodded, but his expression was subdued. We held them off, he said, but this isn't over. Not until we make sure they never come back. As the sun set over the horizon, Marcus stood at the edge of the lot, his gaze fixed on the open road. The fight had been won, but the war wasn't finished. The cheers of the defenders at Crossroads Truck Stop were short-lived. While the immediate threat had been neutralized, Marcus knew the cartel behind the road wolves wouldn't let this defeat slide. The fight at the roadhouse had sent a clear message, but it had also drawn a line in the sand, one that Diego Ramirez, the cartel's enforcer, would be eager to cross. Marcus leaned against the diner's counter, watching the exhausted defenders settle back into the quiet rhythms of the truck stop. Sheriff Cooper approached him, his face grim. We caught a couple of their guys trying to slip away, Cooper said. One of them talked. Ramirez isn't happy, and he's sending reinforcements. Marcus's jaw tightened. How long do we have? Hours maybe, Cooper replied. They're moving fast. Marcus nodded, his mind already calculating their next moves. Then we make every second count. Fortifying the stop, the defenders sprang into action. The success at the roadhouse had bolstered their morale, but now the stakes were higher than ever. Marcus called a meeting in the diner, spreading out a new map of the area. They'll hit us hard and fast, he said. Ramirez won't make the same mistakes Hammer did. He's bringing professionals, not just bikers. That means better weapons, better tactics, and no hesitation. Big Steve crossed his arms, his brow furrowed. So, what's the plan? We hold them here, Marcus replied. Carl, reinforce the barricades. Make them stronger and higher. Steve, take your team and set up defensive positions around the lot. Mrs. Connolly, keep monitoring their movements and let us know the second they're close. And the diner? Beth asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Marcus glanced at her. The diner is the heart of this place. We protect it at all costs. The calm before the storm. As night fell, the defenders took their positions. The truck stop was eerily quiet, the anticipation of the coming attack hanging heavy in the air. Floodlights illuminated the lot, casting long shadows over the reinforced barricades. Inside the diner, Jenny moved between tables, refilling coffee cups for the weary defenders. She stopped at Marcus's table, where he sat with Big Steve, Iron Hand, and Carl. "Any chance they won't show?" she asked, her voice hopeful. Marcus shook his head. "They'll show. Ramirez doesn't leave loose ends." Jenny nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she poured coffee. "Then let's make sure they regret it." Beth approached the table, her apron streaked with grease and flour. "If anyone needs food, there's plenty in the kitchen," she said. "Thanks, Beth," Marcus said. As she walked away, Big Steve leaned in. "She's tougher than she looks." "She's tougher than most of us," Marcus replied with a faint smile. The attack begins. The first sign of trouble came just after midnight. Mrs. Connolly, stationed in the makeshift surveillance room, radioed in. "Multiple vehicles approaching from the south," she reported. "At least 10 SUVs, maybe more." Marcus grabbed his rifle and stepped outside, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. Sure enough, a line of headlights glowed in the distance, growing brighter as they approached. "They're here," Marcus said. "Everyone to your positions." The defenders moved with practiced efficiency, their movements a stark contrast to the chaotic fight at the roadhouse. This time, they were ready. The SUVs roared into the lot, skidding to a stop just beyond the barricades. Doors flew open, and heavily armed men poured out, their weapons gleaming under the floodlights. Diego Ramirez stepped out last, his tailored suit and cold demeanor a chilling contrast to the chaos around him. He surveyed the truck stop with a predator's gaze before speaking. "Marcus Davidson," he called out, his voice calm but deadly. "You've been quite the thorn in my side." Marcus stepped forward, his rifle at the ready. "You should have left us alone, Ramirez." Ramirez smirked. "Oh, I don't leave things unfinished. But I'm not unreasonable. Surrender now, and I might let you live." Marcus didn't blink. "You want this place? Come take it." Ramirez's smirk faded. He turned to his men and gave a sharp nod. "Kill them all." All-out war. The defenders opened fire as the cartel's men advanced on the barricades. The sharp crack of gunfire echoed across the lot, mingling with the shouts of the attackers and the defenders' commands. Carl and his team held the left flank, using the reinforced barricades to their advantage. He shouted orders over the din, his crowbar replaced by a rifle that he wielded with surprising precision. On the right, Big Steve and Iron Hand worked in tandem, their military training evident as they picked off attackers with practiced efficiency. Marcus moved between the front lines, his calm presence a steadying force for the defenders. He took down targets with calculated precision, his movements deliberate and controlled. Inside the diner, Doc Wilson worked furiously, tending to the wounded as they were brought in. Jenny assisted him, her initial fear replaced by a fierce determination to help. "Keep pressure on the wound," Doc instructed as she knelt beside a trucker with a gunshot to the leg. "I've got it," Jenny replied, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. A critical moment. As the battle raged on, Ramirez made his move. Flanked by two of his men, he slipped around the barricades, heading for the diner's side entrance. Marcus spotted him just in time. "Steve, cover me," he shouted, breaking into a sprint. Ramirez and his men forced their way into the diner, their weapons raised. Beth, standing at the counter, froze as Ramirez leveled his pistol at her. "Don't move," Ramirez warned. Before he could act, Marcus burst through the door, his rifle trained on the cartel leader. "Let her go, Ramirez." Ramirez turned slowly, his smirk returning. "You really think you can stop me, Davidson?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Try me." In the tense standoff that followed, the chaos outside seemed to fade, leaving only the sound of labored breathing and the distant crackle of gunfire. Finally, Ramirez lowered his weapon, his cold gaze never leaving Marcus. "You're a fool," he said. "You can win this fight, but you'll lose the war." Marcus didn't reply. He struck Ramirez with the butt of his rifle, knocking him unconscious. Victory at a cost. The remaining cartel forces, seeing their leader defeated, began to retreat. The defenders held their ground, their combined efforts forcing the attackers to flee into the night. As the last of the SUVs disappeared, a weary cheer rose from the defenders. They had won for now. Marcus stood in the lot, his gaze sweeping over the battered truck stop. The barricades were scarred, and the diner's windows were shattered, but the heart of Crossroads remained intact. Beth approached him, her voice soft. "It's over." Marcus shook his head. "Not yet, but it's a start." The first rays of dawn crept over the truck stop, bathing the scene in a soft golden light. Crossroads stood battered but unbroken. The once pristine diner windows were shattered, the barricades marred with bullet holes, and the gravel lot bore the scars of the night's battle. Yet, amidst the chaos, there was a profound sense of triumph. Marcus Davidson stood near the edge of the lot, surveying the aftermath with tired eyes. He clutched a steaming cup of coffee that Beth had pressed into his hands moments earlier. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion, but his posture remained resolute. The defenders moved about, tending to the wounded and clearing the debris. Sheriff Cooper coordinated with his deputies, their radios crackling as they called for reinforcements to secure the area. Big Steve and Iron Hand were already dismantling parts of the barricades, their movements slow but purposeful. Beth stepped out of the diner, her apron streaked with grease and her face streaked with dirt, but her eyes were clear and steady. She walked up to Marcus, her voice soft. "You did it. We did it." Marcus nodded, taking a long sip of his coffee. "We held them off," he said. "But the cost?" His voice trailed off as he glanced around at the wounded defenders and the shattered remnants of their defenses. Beth placed a hand on his arm. "You saved this place, Marcus. You saved all of us."
Healing wounds.
Inside the diner, Doc Wilson worked tirelessly, his hands steady despite the fatigue etched into his features. Jenny assisted him, moving quickly between patients with bandages and water. "You're a natural at this," Doc said, glancing up at Jenny as she carefully cleaned a wound on one of the truckers. Jenny managed a small smile. "I didn't think I'd be able to handle it, but I guess you don't really know what you're capable of until you're tested." Doc nodded. "You did good, kid. We couldn't have managed without you." Across the room, Mrs. Connolly sat with a laptop balanced on her knees, her fingers flying over the keyboard. She was cataloging evidence from the battle, photos, videos, and radio transmissions to ensure they had everything needed to press charges against the road wolves and the cartel. Sheriff Cooper joined her, his face lined with fatigue. "This'll help," he said, nodding toward the files. "But we're not out of the woods yet. Ramirez may be down, but the cartel won't let this slide." Mrs. Connolly didn't look up. "Let them come. We'll be ready." Reflections. Later that morning, Marcus gathered the core team around one of the diner's few intact tables. Big Steve, Iron Hand, Carl Martinez, Sheriff Cooper, Beth, and Mrs. Connolly sat with him, their faces weary but determined. "We've dealt a major blow to the cartel," Marcus began. "But we need to be realistic. They're not going to forget this, and they're not going to forgive it." Big Steve leaned forward, his massive hands resting on the table. "So, what's the plan?" "We keep fighting." Marcus shook his head. "We've done enough fighting. Now, it's about making sure this place is safe, really safe. That means working with the sheriff's office to strengthen security, keeping the community informed, and staying vigilant." Carl nodded. "I can reinforce the barricades, make them permanent. Maybe add some surveillance cameras, too." Sheriff Cooper chimed in. "And I'll work on getting more deputies assigned to this area. It won't be easy, but after last night, I think I can make a strong case." Mrs. Connolly folded her hands in her lap. "And I'll make sure the evidence we've gathered gets into the right hands. The more pressure we put on the cartel, the less room they'll have to operate." Beth glanced around the table, her voice quiet but firm. "And the diner? It's not just a truck stop anymore. It's a symbol. People will come here because they know it stands for something." Marcus gave her a faint smile. "Then we'd better make sure it's worth standing for." Rebuilding and moving forward. Over the next few days, the community rallied around Crossroads. Locals showed up with tools, lumber, and fresh supplies, determined to help rebuild what had been damaged. Truckers passing through offered donations and shared stories of the battle, spreading word of the defenders' bravery far and wide. Beth worked tirelessly to restore the diner, scrubbing every surface and replacing every broken plate and cup. Jenny, now a permanent part of the team, painted a mural on one of the walls, a vivid depiction of unity and resilience, with the words "Crossroads Strong" emblazoned across the top. Carl and his crew reinforced the barricades, installing heavy steel gates and motion-activated floodlights. Sheriff Cooper's deputies began making regular patrols, their presence a comforting reminder that the truck stop wasn't alone in its fight. Marcus spent his days overseeing the reconstruction and his nights poring over maps and reports. Though the immediate threat had passed, he knew the fight wasn't over. A quiet moment. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus sat alone at the edge of the lot. The hum of conversation and the distant clatter of tools filled the air behind him, but he remained still, lost in thought. Beth approached, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to Marcus and sat down beside him. "You should take a break," she said. Marcus took a sip, the warmth of the coffee soothing the lingering tension in his chest. "This is my break," he replied with a faint smile. Beth chuckled softly. "You know, Marcus, when you first came here, I never imagined you'd end up saving the place." "I didn't imagine it either," he admitted. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "Do you think it's really over?" Beth asked. Marcus's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "No," he said, "but we've bought ourselves some time. And sometimes, time is all you need to turn the tide." A new beginning. By the end of the week, Crossroads was once again bustling with activity. Truckers filled the diner, locals exchanged stories over coffee, and the hum of life returned to the stop. Jenny's mural became a symbol of the fight, drawing visitors from neighboring towns. People came not just to see the truck stop, but to meet the defenders who had stood against impossible odds. Marcus, ever watchful, continued his quiet vigil. He knew the cartel might return, but he also knew that this time, they'd be ready. As the sun set on another day, Beth turned the neon "Open" sign back on, its familiar glow a beacon for all who passed through. Crossroads wasn't just a truck stop anymore. It was a testament to what a united community could achieve. The morning after Crossroads Truck Stop resumed normal operations, the diner buzzed with life. Locals, truckers, and travelers packed the booths and counter stools, the energy in the air brighter than it had been in days. The events of the battle were still fresh in everyone's minds, but the mood had shifted from fear to pride. Marcus sat at his usual corner table, nursing a cup of black coffee. He watched as Jenny, more confident than ever, worked the floor with ease, her laughter occasionally cutting through the clamor of voices. Beth moved behind the counter, her movements quick but relaxed, as if the weight of the last few weeks had finally lifted. Big Steve slid into the seat across from Marcus, his plate stacked high with pancakes. "You know, for a guy who saved a town, you don't look too thrilled," he said, grinning through a mouthful of food. Marcus chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Just taking it all in?" "You should. This place wouldn't be standing if it weren't for you." "It wasn't just me," Marcus said, his tone serious. "We all had a part in this." "Yeah," Steve agreed, leaning back in his chair. "But someone had to lead, and you did that. Whether you like it or not, you're a hero around here." Marcus didn't respond, but the faintest hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Ramirez's fallout. Word of the battle at Crossroads spread quickly, reaching even the higher echelons of the cartel. Diego Ramirez, now in custody thanks to Sheriff Cooper's quick coordination with federal authorities, faced an uncertain future. The evidence Mrs. Connolly had compiled, photographs, video recordings, and witness testimonies, painted a damning picture. In a nearby city, a federal prosecutor reviewed the case, his expression grim. "This could blow open the cartel's entire operation," he said, flipping through the files. And it all started with a truck stop in the middle of nowhere. The cartel, rattled by Ramirez's failure, began to pull back from the region, wary of drawing further attention. For now, Crossroads was safe. The community rebuilds. Days turned into weeks, and the scars of the battle began to fade. The shattered diner windows were replaced with sturdier panes, the barricades were repurposed into decorative planters, and the parking lot was smoothed over with fresh gravel. The mural Jenny had painted inside the diner became a focal point of the space. People posed for photos in front of it, its vibrant colors and powerful message resonating far beyond the truck stop. Carl Martinez, ever resourceful, installed a state-of-the-art security system, complete with cameras and motion sensors. "If anyone so much as sneezes near this place, we'll know about it," he joked as he tested the system. Beth and Jenny organized a community potluck to celebrate the victory. Tables were set up outside the diner, and the smell of barbecue and freshly baked pies filled the air. The gathering wasn't just about food. It was about reclaiming the truck stop as a place of joy and connection. Marcus's legacy. Despite the celebrations, Marcus remained a quiet presence. He spent his days ensuring the defenses were maintained and his nights walking the perimeter, his sharp gaze scanning the horizon. One evening, Beth found him sitting at the same bench near the edge of the lot where he had reflected before the final battle. She sat beside him, handing him a piece of pie wrapped in a napkin. "You've earned this," she said. Marcus took the pie, but his expression remained contemplative. "What's on your mind?" Beth asked. "Just wondering what comes next," Marcus admitted. "For me, for this place." Beth smiled gently. "What comes next is life. People will keep coming through, and this place will keep being a haven. And you? You'll keep being the reason they feel safe here." "I'm not sure I'm staying," Marcus said after pause. Beth's smile faded. "You're leaving?" "Not right away," he said. "But someday. This place doesn't need me forever. You've proven that it can stand on its own." Beth didn't argue. Instead, she reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "When that day comes, just know you'll always have a place here. Wherever you go, you'll always be part of this community." A quiet farewell. Weeks later, as the truck stop settled into a new normal, Marcus made a decision. One morning, before dawn, he packed a small bag and slipped out quietly. He left a note on the counter for Beth. "Beth, thank you for everything. You gave me a place to call home when I needed it most. This place is stronger than ever, and it doesn't need me to keep it that way. I'll be back to visit. Count on that. Marcus." When Beth found the note later that morning, she smiled through tears. She folded it carefully and placed it under the cash register, a reminder of the man who had helped them all find their strength. Crossroads future. In the months that followed, Crossroads Truck Stop flourished. Truckers from across the country made detours to visit the now legendary diner, eager to meet the people who had stood up to the road wolves. Jenny took over much of the day-to-day management, her confidence and leadership growing with each passing week. Beth continued to serve her famous coffee and pies, her smile a constant source of comfort to travelers and locals alike. Big Steve and Carl turned their attention to mentoring younger members of the community, teaching them the skills and values that had carried Crossroads through its darkest hours. And though Marcus was gone, his presence lingered. The stories of his courage and leadership became part of the truck stop's lore, passed down to every new face that walked through its doors. One evening, a young trucker stopped at the diner and pointed to Jenny's mural. "Who's the guy in the middle?" he asked. Jenny smiled as she wiped down the counter. "That's Marcus. He's the reason we're all still here." The neon open sign buzzed softly as the sun dipped below the horizon. Crossroads Truck Stop stood as a beacon on the highway, not just a place to rest, but a symbol of resilience, community, and the power of standing together. And somewhere, on a stretch of open road, Marcus Davidson drove on, carrying the lessons of Crossroads with him, knowing that, wherever he went, he'd always have a home.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.